They say a mother's love knows no bounds. But what happens when that love is met with cruelty, manipulation, and betrayal? My name is Margaret Chen, and this is the story of how my own daughter tried to erase me from the most important day of her life, never knowing that I held all the cards from the very beginning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra, special for you. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, sliding through my mail slot like any other piece of correspondence. Cream-colored cardstock, elegant calligraphy, the kind of expensive stationery that whispered of careful planning and significant expense. Mr. and Mrs. Richard Blackwell request the honor of your presence at the wedding of their daughter, Jessica Marie Blackwell, to Mr. Christopher Allen Hayes. I held the invitation in my hands, reading it twice before the full weight of what I was seeing sank in. My daughter Jessica was getting married, and I was being invited like any other guest, not as the mother of the bride, not as someone who had raised her single-handedly for 18 years. Just as Margaret Chen, +1. The return address was Jessica's apartment in downtown Seattle, the same apartment I'd helped her secure when she graduated from the University of Washington with a degree in marketing that I'd paid for. The same apartment where I'd spent countless weekends helping her paint walls, assemble furniture, and stock her kitchen with the basics she needed to start her adult life. I set the invitation on my kitchen counter and made myself a cup of coffee, my hands trembling slightly as I poured the water. This wasn't how I'd imagined learning about my daughter's engagement. No excited phone call, no tearful announcement over dinner, no request for my blessing or my involvement in planning the most important day of her life. Jessica and I hadn't spoken in 6 months. The silence had started with an argument that seemed small at the time, but had grown into something insurmountable. She'd wanted me to co-sign on a loan for a luxury car, a BMW that cost more than some people's annual salaries. When I'd suggested she consider something more practical, something within her budget, she'd exploded. "You never support my dreams," she'd screamed at me across my living room, her face flushed with anger. "All you do is hold me back with your middle-class mentality." Christopher's family would never question something like this. Christopher. Even then, before I'd officially met him, his presence loomed large in our conversations. Jessica had been dating him for 2 years, and from what I could gather, he came from the kind of family that had never worried about money. His father owned a chain of successful restaurants across the Pacific Northwest. His mother was a prominent figure in Seattle's charity circuit. They lived in a mansion in Bellevue with a 3-car garage and a view of Lake Washington. I'd tried to meet Christopher several times, extending invitations for dinner, suggesting we all get together for a casual lunch. But Jessica always had excuses. He was busy with work. His family had prior commitments. They were traveling. It became clear that she was deliberately keeping us apart, and I began to suspect why. My house in Tacoma was modest but comfortable. I'd bought it 15 years ago with the settlement money from my divorce from Jessica's father, a man who'd walked out when she was 3 years old. The house had 3 bedrooms, a small yard with a vegetable garden, and a mortgage that I'd finally paid off the year before. It wasn't grand, but it was ours. It was the house where Jessica had learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where she'd practiced piano in the living room, where she'd cried over her first heartbreak at the kitchen table. But apparently, it wasn't impressive enough for the Blackwell family standards she was trying to adopt. I'd worked 2 jobs for most of Jessica's childhood. During the day, I managed the office for a small accounting firm downtown. In the evenings and weekends, I ran a freelance photography business from my home studio. I specialized in family portraits, senior pictures, and small events. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady, and it allowed me to be present for Jessica's school plays, soccer games, and parent-teacher conferences. Photography had always been my passion, something I'd discovered in college before life took me in different directions. I'd studied business administration because it seemed practical, but I'd spent my free time in the darkroom, learning about composition and lighting, developing my eye for capturing moments that mattered. When Jessica's father left, photography became more than a hobby. It became survival. Those evening photo sessions and weekend weddings paid for Jessica's orthodontics, her dance lessons, her college application fees. They covered the costs of her prom dress, her graduation party, and the security deposit on her first apartment. Jessica knew this. She'd often come with me to shoots when she was younger, acting as my assistant, holding reflectors and organizing equipment. But somewhere along the way, she'd started to see my work as embarrassing rather than admirable. I remembered the shift happening during her junior year of high school, when she'd started dating boys from wealthier families. Suddenly, she didn't want her friends to know that her mother worked weekends. She'd ask me to park around the corner when dropping her off at parties. She'd grown uncomfortable with the evidence of our middle-class reality. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. I glanced at the caller ID, hoping it might be Jessica, perhaps calling to explain the formal invitation, to bridge the gap that had grown between us. Instead, it was my sister Linda, calling from Portland. "Maggie, did you see the engagement? Announcement in the Seattle Times?" Linda's voice carried a mixture of excitement and concern. I hadn't seen it. I walked to my front porch and retrieved the newspaper I'd left there earlier, spreading it out on the kitchen table as Linda waited on the line. There it was, in the Sunday Society section, a professional photo of Jessica and Christopher, both dressed in formal attire, beaming at the camera. The announcement was lengthy, detailing Christopher's educational background at Stanford, his position at his family's restaurant group, and his family's prominent role in Seattle society. Jessica's section was notably brief. The bride-to-be graduated from the University of Washington with a degree in marketing and is currently employed at Morrison & Associates Advertising. No mention of her childhood in Tacoma. No mention of her mother. It was as if her life had begun the day she met Christopher. "They look happy," Linda said gently, but I could hear the question in her voice. "They do," I agreed, studying the photo. Jessica looked radiant, more polished than I'd ever seen her. Her hair was professionally styled, her makeup flawless. She wore a dress that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in 6 months. But there was something in her smile that seemed forced, performative rather than genuine. "Have you met him yet?" Linda asked. "No, not officially. Jessica's been busy." Linda was quiet for a moment. She'd watched me raise Jessica alone, had seen the sacrifices I'd made, the nights I'd stayed up working on photo edits after Jessica had gone to bed, the weekends I'd spent at youth soccer tournaments instead of building my business. She understood the weight of what this estrangement meant. "Maybe the wedding will be a chance to reconnect," she offered, but her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen as the afternoon light faded, holding the wedding invitation and the newspaper announcement. 6 months of silence, and now this formal summons to witness my daughter marry a man I'd never met, in a ceremony I apparently hadn't been consulted about. But I wasn't going to let hurt feelings keep me from being there for Jessica's wedding day. Whatever had gone wrong between us, however she felt about me now, I was still her mother. I was still the person who had held her hand through every important moment of her life until now. I pulled out my phone and began researching wedding photographers in the Seattle area. If Jessica was determined to keep me at arm's length, if I was going to be just another guest at her wedding, then I wanted to make sure she had the best possible documentation of her special day. It was a gift I could give her anonymously, a way to show my love even if she didn't want to receive it directly. After an hour of research, I found exactly what I was looking for. Rebecca Martinez, one of Seattle's most sought-after wedding photographers. Her portfolio was stunning, her style elegant and timeless. Her rates were substantial, more than I'd typically spend on a single purchase. But this wasn't a typical situation. I called Rebecca's studio and explained what I wanted to do. I wanted to hire her for Jessica's wedding, but I wanted it to be a surprise gift. I would pay her fees directly, but Jessica and her fiancé should believe they were hiring her themselves, at a significantly reduced rate that would make her services accessible to them. Rebecca was intrigued by the request. So you want to gift them premium wedding photography, but you don't want them to know it's from you? Exactly. I want my daughter to have beautiful memories of her wedding day, regardless of our current relationship. We worked out the details. Rebecca would approach Jessica and Christopher directly, offering them a special package at a fraction of her usual cost. She would explain it as a new promotion she was running, something to build her portfolio with younger couples. In reality, I would be paying her full rate plus a coordination fee for managing the deception. The plan felt both generous and heartbreaking. I was giving my daughter one of the most important gifts possible, professional documentation of the most significant day of her life, while remaining completely invisible in the process. But if this was the only way I could contribute to her happiness, then this was what I would do. 3 days later, Rebecca called to confirm that Jessica and Christopher had accepted her offer. They were thrilled to have secured such a high-end photographer for their wedding at what they believed was an incredibly discounted rate. "She seems lovely," Rebecca told me. "Very excited about the wedding, very focused on getting everything. Perfect. She did mention that the guest list is somewhat complex." Complex how? She said there were some family dynamics to navigate. She wanted to make sure I understood that certain people might not be in many of the formal photos. My chest tightened. Even in hiring a wedding photographer, a photographer I was secretly paying for, Jessica was already planning to minimize my presence. But I had set this plan in motion, and I would see it through. Whatever happened at the wedding, whatever role Jessica assigned me, at least I would know that she had the best possible photographer capturing every moment of her special day. What I didn't know yet was that this small act of secret generosity would eventually become the key to everything that followed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 2 weeks after hiring Rebecca, I received a phone call that would change everything. It was Jessica, and for a moment, my heart leaped with hope that she was finally reaching out to bridge the gap between us. "Mom, I need to talk to you about the wedding," she said, her voice crisp and businesslike. No greeting, no small talk, just straight to the point. "Of course, sweetheart. I'm so happy you called. I've been hoping we could—" "This isn't about reconciliation," she interrupted. "This is about logistics. Christopher's family is handling most of the arrangements, and we need to discuss your role in the ceremony." The word role hit me like a slap, as if I were an actor being assigned a part rather than her mother participating in one of the most important days of her life. "What do you mean, my role?" Jessica sighed, the sound carrying through the phone with unmistakable impatience. "Look, Mom, I know this is awkward, but we need to be practical. The Blackwell family has certain expectations about how weddings should be conducted. There are traditions, protocols that need to be followed." I gripped the phone tighter. "Jessica, I'm your mother. What protocols could possibly exclude me from—" "You're not excluded," she said quickly. "You're invited. You'll be seated with the other family members. But in terms of the formal aspects, the processional, the receiving line, the family photos, we've decided to keep things simple." Simple. The word hung in the air between us like a sword. What exactly does simple mean? It means that Christopher's mother, Patricia, will be handling the traditional mother of the bride duties. She's experienced with these kinds of events. She knows how to work with the vendors, how to coordinate with the wedding party. It just makes more sense. I felt the ground shift beneath me. "Christopher's mother? Jessica, she's not your mother." "I am. Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Patricia has been like a second mother to me. She's helped me plan this entire wedding, something you weren't available to do. I wasn't available because you never asked me to be available. You never told me you were engaged. You never invited me to be part of the planning process. Because I knew you'd try to take over. You'd have opinions about everything. And you'd want to do things your way, within your budget, at your level. This wedding is important to Christopher's family. It's going to be featured in Seattle Magazine. There will be prominent people there. Business associates, community leaders. We can't afford to have any complications. That's what I had become to my own daughter, a complication to be managed rather than a mother to be celebrated. Jessica, what happened to us? When did I become someone you're embarrassed by? You're not, she started, then stopped. For a moment, I heard something softer in her voice. Something that reminded me of the little girl who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares. But it disappeared as quickly as it had come. Mom, this isn't about embarrassment. It's about what's appropriate for this particular situation. And what situation is that? A high society wedding. Patricia knows these people. She understands the expectations. She's been married to Richard for 30 years. And she knows how to navigate these social circles. You don't. The truth finally emerged, stark and brutal. I wasn't sophisticated enough. I wasn't wealthy enough. I wasn't connected enough. In Jessica's eyes, I wasn't enough, period. So what exactly are you asking of me? I'm asking you to let Patricia handle the mother of the bride responsibilities. She'll escort me down the aisle. She'll stand in the receiving line. She'll be in the immediate family photos. You'll be seated in the second row with Aunt Linda and the other extended family. Extended family. I had been demoted from mother to distant relative in my own daughter's wedding. And if I refuse? The silence stretched, long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then Jessica spoke, her voice harder than I'd ever heard it. Then I guess you won't be comfortable at the wedding, and maybe it would be better if you didn't come. The threat was clear. Accept my diminished role or don't come at all. Jessica, honey, please. Let's talk about this in person. Let's sit down and figure out how to make this work for everyone. I don't want to cause problems, but I also can't pretend this doesn't hurt. There's nothing to figure out, Mom. The decisions have been made. The wedding is in 6 weeks. If you want to be there, these are the terms. After she hung up, I sat in my living room for hours, staring at the wall where I'd hung dozens of photos of Jessica throughout her childhood. Jessica at her first piano recital. Jessica graduating from high school. Jessica accepting her diploma at college. In every single photo, it was just the two of us. No father figure, no extended family, just a mother and daughter who had faced the world together. But apparently that shared history meant nothing now. I called Linda that evening and told her about the conversation. She was outraged. She wants Christopher's mother to walk her down. The aisle? Maggie, that's insane. You raised that girl by yourself. You sacrificed everything for her. Maybe I sacrificed too much, I said quietly. Maybe I made her feel like she owed me something, and now she's trying to break free from that obligation. Don't you dare blame yourself for this. Jessica is being selfish and cruel, and someone needs to tell her so. But I wasn't sure confrontation would help. Jessica had made her choice, and she'd made it clear that my options were limited. Accept the role of grateful guest, or don't attend at all. Over. The next few days, I found myself studying the wedding invitation again, looking for clues I might have missed. The ceremony was being held at the Grand Fairmont Hotel in downtown Seattle, one of the city's most prestigious venues. The reception would follow in their crystal ballroom. Even the location choices spoke to a level of expense and sophistication. That was far beyond anything I could have provided. Maybe Jessica was right. Maybe Patricia Blackwell was better equipped to navigate this kind of event. maybe I would have been out of my depth, making mistakes that would embarrass Jessica in front of her new family. But even as I tried to rationalize her decision, the hurt remained sharp and persistent. This wasn't about capability or sophistication. This was about love, about respect, about honoring the relationship that had shaped both of our lives for 25 years. I decided to drive to Seattle that weekend, not to confront Jessica, but to see the venue where her wedding would take place. I wanted to understand the world she was entering, the standards she felt she needed to meet. The Grand Fairmont was even more imposing in person than it appeared in photographs. The lobby featured marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and artwork that probably cost more than my annual income. Elegantly dressed guests moved through the space with the kind of casual confidence that comes from belonging in such places. I stood in the lobby for nearly an hour, watching and listening, trying to imagine myself navigating this environment on Jessica's wedding day. Would I know which fork to use at dinner? Would I understand the social cues, the unspoken rules that governed interactions among Seattle's elite? For the first time, I began to understand Jessica's anxiety. She wasn't just marrying Christopher. She was marrying into a world that operated by different rules than the one in which she'd been raised. She was trying to transform herself into someone who could belong in places like this, and perhaps she saw my presence as a reminder of who she used to be. But understanding her motivations didn't make her choices hurt any less. As I drove home, that evening, I made a decision. I would attend the wedding. I would accept the diminished role Jessica had assigned me. I would sit in the second row and watch Patricia Blackwell escort my daughter down the aisle. I would smile graciously in whatever photos I was allowed to be in, and I would celebrate Jessica's happiness, even if it came at the cost of my own. What I didn't yet realize was that my secret arrangement with Rebecca Martinez would soon reveal truths that would change everything. The photographer I had hired to capture Jessica's perfect day was about to become the lens through which everyone would see exactly who had made that perfection possible. But first, I had to survive the engagement party, where I would meet the Blackwell family for the first time and discover just how thoroughly I had been erased from Jessica's new narrative. The engagement party invitation arrived 3 days after my painful phone conversation with Jessica. Unlike the wedding invitation, this one came via email, a digital afterthought that made it clear I was being included out of obligation rather than desire. You are cordially invited to celebrate the engagement of Jessica Marie Blackwell and Christopher Allen Hayes, the elegant script read. Saturday, April 15th, 7 p.m. at the Blackwell Family Estate, Bellevue. The Blackwell Family Estate. Even the address reinforced the gulf between my world and theirs. 2847 Lakeview Terrace, one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the Seattle area, where homes regularly sold for millions, and privacy was guaranteed by gates, guards, and carefully manicured distance from ordinary life. I spent the week leading up to the party in a state of nervous preparation that reminded me of my teenage years getting ready for prom. What does one wear to an engagement party at a mansion? How does one behave when meeting people whose monthly car payments exceeded my mortgage? I settled on a navy blue dress I'd bought for a cousin's wedding 2 years earlier, paired with the pearls my mother had left me. Conservative, respectful, hopefully appropriate. I practiced conversations in my car during my commute to work, rehearsing responses to questions about my job, my home, my life as Jessica's mother. But nothing could have prepared me for the reality of walking into the Blackwell family world. The estate sat behind iron gates on 3 acres of perfectly landscaped grounds. The house itself was a sprawling Tudor revival with leaded glass windows and ivy climbing the stone facade. Valet attendants in crisp uniforms directed guests to park along the circular driveway, where a collection of luxury vehicles, BMWs, Mercedes Audis, gleamed under strategically placed landscape lighting. I handed my 10-year-old Honda Civic to a valet who was probably younger than Jessica, tipped him $5, hoping it was enough but suspecting it wasn't, and walked toward the front entrance with my heart hammering against my ribs. The interior of the house was even more intimidating than the exterior. Original hardwood floors stretched through rooms that could have housed my entire downstairs. Oil paintings in gilded frames lined the walls, and fresh flower arrangements that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month adorned every surface. Patricia Blackwell appeared at my elbow almost immediately, as if she'd been watching for my arrival. She was exactly what I'd expected, perfectly groomed, expensively dressed, with the kind of effortless elegance that comes from a lifetime of privilege. "You must be Margaret," she said, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Patricia Blackwell, Christopher's mother. We're so pleased you could join us." Her smile was warm, but measuring, the kind of expression that takes inventory while appearing welcoming. I could feel her cataloging my appearance, my dress, my jewelry, filing away details for later analysis. "Thank you for having me. Your home is beautiful." "We've been so looking forward to meeting you," Patricia continued, though something in her tone suggested this wasn't entirely true. "Jessica has told us so much about you." I wondered what exactly Jessica had shared, and whether any of it bore resemblance to reality. Patricia guided me through the crowd, introducing me to various guests as Jessica's mother, Margaret. Not the mother of the bride, or our dear friend, Margaret, but simply Jessica's mother, as if that were my primary identifying characteristic and possibly my only relevant one. The guests were uniformly well-dressed and confident, moving through conversations about European vacations, private schools, and business ventures, with the casual ease of people who had never worried about money. I smiled and nodded, contributing little beyond polite responses to direct questions. "Margaret works in accounting," Patricia would explain to people, though she somehow made it sound like I balanced checkbooks rather than managed a professional office. I was nursing my second glass of wine and wondering how long I needed to stay to be polite when Jessica appeared beside me. She looked stunning in a cream-colored cocktail dress that probably cost more than I earned in a week, her hair styled in an elaborate updo that had clearly required professional attention. "Mom, I'm glad you came," she said, though her body language suggested the opposite. She stood at an angle that prevented us from appearing together in the photos that circulating guests were taking. "You look beautiful, sweetheart. The dress is gorgeous." "Thank you." Patricia helped me pick it out. She has incredible taste. Of course she did. Patricia had helped choose the dress for the engagement party, just as she would help Jessica choose everything else for the wedding. I was beginning to understand that my displacement hadn't happened overnight. It had been a gradual process, with Patricia filling the maternal role I'd been slowly squeezed out of. "Christopher, come meet my mother," Jessica called to a tall, handsome man across the room. He approached with the kind of confident stride that suggested he'd never encountered a door that wasn't opened for him. "Mrs. Chen, it's wonderful to finally meet you," Christopher said, shaking my hand with practiced charm. "Jessica's told me so much about you." "All good things, I hope." "Of course. She's very proud of how hard you worked to raise her." The comment was meant to be complimentary, but something about the phrasing felt condescending. How hard I worked, as if my efforts were admirable in the way that any struggle against difficult circumstances might be admirable, but not necessarily successful or worthwhile. "Jessica's always been easy to love," I replied, though she was currently avoiding eye contact with me. "Well, we're just thrilled to have her as part of our family," Christopher continued. "Mom's been like a second mother to her already. They spend so much time together planning the wedding." A second mother. The phrase hit me like a physical blow, especially coming from the groom himself. How thoroughly had Jessica rewritten our relationship that even Christopher saw Patricia as her primary maternal figure? "Mom, let me show you the terrace," Jessica said suddenly, taking my arm and guiding me away from the crowd. For a moment, I thought she wanted private time to talk, to perhaps acknowledge the awkwardness of the situation or to find some way to bridge the gap between us. Instead, she led me to a secluded corner of the outdoor space and turned to face me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of desperation and determination that made her look like a stranger. "Mom, I need you to understand something," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Tonight is important. These people, they're going to be my family now. They're going to be Christopher's business associates, our social circle, our children's grandparents, and godparents. I need them to accept me." "Of course they'll accept you. You're marrying their son." "It's not that simple. There are expectations, standards. They need to see that I can fit into their world, that I can be the kind of wife Christopher needs." "And what kind of wife is that?" Jessica glanced back toward the house, where the party continued in warm, golden light. "The kind who comes from the right background, the kind who understands their values, their priorities." "Jessica, you do understand their values. You're intelligent, educated, accomplished." "But I'm not one of them," she interrupted. "I didn't grow up with money. I didn't go to private schools or spend summers in Europe. My mother worked 2 jobs and took photos at small-town weddings." The shame in her voice when she said those last words cut deeper than any anger could have. This wasn't just about social climbing or impressing new in-laws. Jessica was genuinely ashamed of where she came from, of who I was, of the life we'd built together. "So, what exactly are you asking me to do?" "I'm asking you to help me succeed here. I'm asking you to understand that sometimes love means stepping back, letting someone else take the spotlight." "Someone else like Patricia?" "Patricia knows how to navigate this world. She knows what these people expect, how to make the right impressions. She's offered to help me, to guide me through this transition." "And where does that leave me?" Jessica looked down at her hands, twisting the engagement ring that probably cost more than my car. "It leaves you as my mother, always, but maybe not. As my primary mother figure, at least not in public." "Primary mother figure?" As if motherhood were a position that could be shared, delegated, or reassigned based on social convenience. "Jessica, do you remember when you were 8 and you broke your arm falling off your bike?" She looked confused by the apparent change of subject. "Yes, but what does that—" "Do you remember who carried you to the car? Who held your hand in the emergency room? Who slept in that uncomfortable chair next to your hospital bed for 3 nights? Mom, please don't—" "It was me. When you had nightmares, it was me who came running. When you needed help with homework, when you were heartbroken, over boys when you were scared about starting college, it was me. Always me. I know that. I remember. But now, because Patricia has more money and better connections, she gets to be your mother at the most important moments of your adult life." Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but her jaw remained set with determination. "Mom, this isn't about replacing you. It's about what's best for my future. And apparently, I'm not what's best for your future." Before she could answer, Patricia appeared at the terrace door, her smile bright and concerned. "There you are. Jessica, dear, we need you inside. Christopher's father wants to make a toast, and all the family should be together." All the family. Patricia linked her arm through Jessica's with the casual intimacy of a close relationship, and together they walked back toward the house. I followed, several steps behind, understanding finally that I was no longer part of the inner circle. I was an observer, a guest at my own daughter's celebration. The toast was everything I'd expected. Richard Blackwell spoke eloquently about welcoming Jessica into their family, about the bright future ahead for the young couple. Patricia beamed beside him, one arm around Jessica's shoulders in a maternal gesture that should have been mine. Stood at the back of the crowd, watching my daughter smile and accept congratulations from people who would never know that the woman they were celebrating had once eaten peanut butter sandwiches for dinner because I'd spent the grocery money on her school supplies. But as I prepared to leave that night, something unexpected happened. The photographer Patricia had hired for the party, a different photographer than Rebecca, someone more focused on social documentation than artistic vision, approached me with her camera. "Excuse me, are you Jessica's mother? I'd love to get a photo of you with the bride-to-be." Before I could respond, Jessica stepped forward quickly. "Actually, we're trying to keep the photos focused on the immediate family tonight. Maybe another time." The photographer looked confused. "But aren't you immediate family?" Jessica's face flushed, but Patricia smoothly intervened. "We're just being selective about which shots we're taking tonight. We want to make sure we get all the right combinations. All the right combinations." I wasn't part of the right combination. I left the party that night with a clearer understanding of my place in Jessica's new world. I had none, but I also left with something else. A growing sense that this elaborate performance wasn't making Jessica happy. Despite the beautiful dress, the expensive ring, and the adoring in-laws, something in my daughter's eyes looked hollow, desperate. She was trying so hard to become someone else that she was losing herself in the process. And she was willing to sacrifice our relationship to make that transformation complete. What I didn't know yet was that my secret arrangement with Rebecca Martinez was about to provide me with a front-row seat to watch that transformation reach its devastating conclusion. 3 weeks before the wedding, I received a phone call that would test every limit of my patience and dignity. It was Jessica, and for once she sounded nervous rather than coldly businesslike. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something, and I need you to promise you won't get upset." In my experience, conversations that begin with requests not to get upset are guaranteed to be upsetting. I braced myself. "What is it, Jessica?" "It's about the wedding photos. The photographer we hired, Rebecca Martinez, she's incredibly talented, but she's also very expensive. Even with the discount we got, the package is still pretty substantial." I knew exactly how substantial it was, since I was paying Rebecca's full rate plus the coordination fee. But I kept my voice neutral. "Okay, what about the photos?" "Well, Rebecca specializes in capturing intimate family moments, and she's known for creating these beautiful family portrait collections. But given the complexity of our family situation, we've decided to keep the formal family photos simple." There was that word again. Simple. Jessica wielded it like a weapon, using it to justify every exclusion, every slight, every way she diminished my role in her life. Simple how? "We're going to focus on the traditional family groupings. Christopher's immediate family, of course. And then some photos with just Christopher and me. Maybe a few with the wedding party." I waited for her to mention where I fit into these traditional family groupings, but the silence stretched uncomfortably long. "Jessica, what about photos with me?" "Mom, we talked about this. Patricia is handling the mother of the bride role. It would be confusing to have multiple maternal figures in the formal photos." "I'm not a maternal figure, Jessica. I'm your mother. Your actual, biological, raised-you-from-birth mother. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. We'll get some casual shots during the reception, okay? You'll be in plenty of photos." But I could hear the dismissal in her voice. Casual shots during the reception meant I'd be background decoration in crowded group photos, not featured in the intimate family portraits that would hang in their home and be passed down to their children. "Jessica, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer." "What? Do you actually want me at your wedding at all?" The question hung in the air between us. I could hear her breathing, could almost feel her struggling with how to respond without sounding completely heartless. "Of course I want you there, Mom. You're my mother. But I'm not allowed to act like your mother. I'm not allowed to be in the family photos. I'm not allowed to participate in any of the traditional mother of the bride activities. So what exactly am I coming to this wedding as?" "You're coming as my family. As someone who loves me and wants to see me happy." "Someone who loves you would be in the family photos, Jessica. Mom, please. I know this is hard, but it's just photos. The important thing is that you're there, that you're witnessing this moment. Just photos. As if photographs weren't how we preserve the most important moments of our lives. As if the visual record of her wedding day wouldn't tell the story of who mattered to her, who belonged, who was worth remembering. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the collection of photo albums that lined my bookshelf. 25 years of Jessica's life documented in careful detail. Her first steps, her first day of school, every birthday party, every school play, every milestone carefully captured and preserved. I pulled down the album from her high school graduation and flipped through the pages. There we were, mother and daughter, beaming at the camera as Jessica held her diploma. The pride in my face was unmistakable. Pride not just in her accomplishment, but in what we had achieved together against considerable odds. Would there be any photos from her wedding that captured that same partnership, that same shared joy? Or would I be relegated to the edges of the frame, a peripheral figure in the most important day of her life? That night, I called Rebecca Martinez to check on the wedding preparations. We'd developed a comfortable working relationship over the past few weeks, and she'd kept me updated on her interactions with Jessica and the Blackwell family. "How are the pre-wedding photo sessions going?" I asked. "Interesting," Rebecca said, and I could hear a note of concern in her voice. "I did an engagement shoot with Jessica and Christopher last week, and I have to say, there's something odd about the family dynamics." "Odd how?" "Well, Patricia Blackwell was there for the entire session, directing poses, making suggestions about lighting and composition, which is fine. Mothers of the groom are often involved. But she was treating Jessica like her own daughter. And Jessica seemed to defer to her on everything." "That's been the pattern," I said carefully, not wanting to reveal too much about my personal situation. "The strange thing is, Jessica kept mentioning you during the shoot. Little comments about how you would have loved this location, or how you taught her to pose for photos when she was little. It was like she couldn't stop thinking about you, even though you weren't there. This surprised me. Jessica had become so skilled at excluding me from her wedding plans that I'd assumed she'd mentally written me out of the experience entirely. Did she say anything specific?" "At one point, she asked me if I thought mothers ever really forgive their daughters for growing up and changing." Patricia tried to redirect the conversation, but Jessica seemed genuinely troubled by the question. Felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, despite all her efforts to replace me with Patricia, Jessica was beginning to recognize what she was losing. "Rebecca, I need to ask you something. On the wedding day, I know Jessica has requested limited family, photos with me, but would it be possible for you to take some candid shots? Maybe capture some moments she might not think to request?" "Of course. I always take candids throughout the day. Some of the most meaningful photos are the unposed moments, the looks between family members, the quiet interactions that happen naturally." "Thank you. I just want to make sure there's some record of me being there, even if I'm not in the formal portraits." 2 days later, I received another call from Jessica, but this time her voice was tight with anger rather than nervous apprehension. "Mom, I need to know if you've been talking to anyone about my wedding." "What do you mean?" "I mean, have you been discussing our family situation with anyone? Because someone apparently told one of Christopher's aunts that there was drama with the mother of the bride, and now Patricia is asking questions." My heart sank. "Jessica, I haven't told anyone anything inappropriate about your wedding. I've been nothing but supportive." "Then how does Christopher's family know that we're having issues? Maybe because it's obvious? Maybe because I've been excluded from every aspect of the wedding planning, and people notice these things?" "Mom, you cannot embarrass me in front of these people. Christopher's family has a reputation to maintain, and if there's gossip about family dysfunction—" "Family dysfunction?" I interrupted. "Is that what you call a mother being hurt that her daughter has replaced her with someone else?" "I haven't. replaced you with anyone. I've just accepted help from people who are in a position to provide it. Jessica, listen to yourself. You're more concerned about Christopher's family's reputation than you are about your own mother's feelings. Because Christopher's family's reputation affects my future. Your feelings, while important to me personally, don't impact the trajectory of my marriage or my social standing. The cold calculation in her voice stunned me. When had my daughter become someone who weighed relationships based on their strategic value? So my feelings don't matter because I can't advance your social standing? That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said, Jessica. You just told me that my emotions are less important than your reputation with people you've known for 2 years. Mom, please, can we just get through the wedding without any more drama? Can you just blend in quietly? Let Patricia handle the visible stuff, and you can just be there in the background? Blend in quietly. Be there in the background. She was asking me to make myself invisible at my own daughter's wedding. Fine, I said quietly. I'll blend in. I'll stay in the background. But Jessica, I want you to understand something. This isn't what love looks like. This isn't how you treat someone who sacrificed everything to give you the life you have now. Mom, I'm not done. You can minimize my role in your wedding. You can exclude me from the photos and the traditions and the celebrations, but you cannot erase the fact that I am the reason you exist, the reason you had opportunities, the reason you were able to become someone the Blackwell family wanted their son to marry. I know that. Do you? Because everything about how you've handled this wedding suggests that you've forgotten. You've forgotten who held your hand through every challenge, who worked overtime to pay for your college, who taught you the values that made you attractive to Christopher in the first place. I haven't forgotten. Then act like it. Act like you remember who loved you first, who loved you most, who loved you when you had nothing to offer in return. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. I had finally said what needed to be said, but I wasn't sure it would make any difference. The wedding was 2 weeks away, and Jessica had made her priorities clear. I would attend as requested, quietly, in the background, blending in like a piece of furniture. But I would also remember everything, every slight, every exclusion, every moment when she chose social advancement over family loyalty. What Jessica didn't know was that Rebecca Martinez was documenting everything too. And sometimes, the camera captures truths that people spend enormous energy trying to hide. The morning of Jessica's wedding dawned gray and drizzling, the kind of Seattle weather that makes everything look muted and uncertain. I stood at my bedroom window, watching raindrops streak down the glass, and wondered if the weather was an omen. I'd barely slept the night before, my mind cycling through 25 years of memories. Jessica's first word, her first steps, the night she came home crying because kids at school had made fun of her secondhand clothes. I'd held her then, promising that someday she'd have everything she wanted. I just never imagined that everything she wanted would exclude me. My dress hung on the closet door, a soft gray silk I'd chosen specifically to blend into the background as Jessica had requested. Nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention away from the bride or compete with Patricia's undoubtedly perfect mother of the groom ensemble. I'd received my final instructions 2 days earlier via text message, not even a phone call. Ceremony starts at 4 p.m. Please be seated by 3:45. Reception begins at 6. Thank you for understanding. As if I were a vendor being given logistics rather than the bride's mother receiving details about her daughter's wedding. The drive to the Grand Fairmont Hotel took 45 minutes through weekend traffic, giving me plenty of time to rehearse the smile I'd need to maintain for the next 8 hours. I'd practiced in the mirror that morning, warm but not effusive, present but not intrusive, supportive but not presumptuous. The hotel's valet stand was busy with wedding guests arriving in luxury vehicles. I handed over my Honda to an attendant, who barely glanced at me, just another middle-aged woman in gray attending someone else's celebration. The hotel lobby buzzed with pre-wedding activity. Guests clustered in small groups, greeting each other with the familiar warmth of people who moved in the same social circles. I recognized some faces from the engagement party, but no one approached me or seemed to remember our earlier introductions. I made my way to the ceremony space, a stunning ballroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. White chairs arranged in perfect rows faced an altar decorated with cascading white orchids and roses, flowers that probably cost more than most people spent on their entire weddings. The seating arrangement told the story of my diminished status. The first row on the bride's side was reserved for the Blackwell family, with small placards marking seats for Patricia, Richard, Christopher's siblings, and other immediate family members. The second row bore a single placard with my name, positioned at the far end next to Jessica's elderly great-aunt from Portland, a woman I'd met twice in my life. I took my assigned seat and watched as the room filled with guests. The groom's side was packed with well-dressed families, business associates, and society figures I recognized from local news coverage. The bride's side was notably smaller. A handful of Jessica's college friends, a few former co-workers, and scattered relatives who looked as out of place as I felt. 20 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, I spotted Rebecca Martinez, setting up her equipment near the altar. She moved with quiet efficiency, adjusting camera settings and positioning herself to capture the processional. For a moment, our eyes met across the room, and she gave me a subtle nod of acknowledgement. Seeing, Rebecca reminded me of the secret I'd been carrying for months. Everyone in this room, including Jessica herself, believed they'd hired one of Seattle's premier wedding photographers at a fraction of her usual cost. They had no idea that the woman documenting this extravagant celebration was there because I'd made it possible. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been excluded from every other aspect of the wedding planning, but I was the one ensuring that Jessica would have the most beautiful photographic record of her special day. It was perhaps the most expensive gift I'd ever given anyone, and the recipient didn't even know I'd given it. Patricia Blackwell entered the ceremony space 15 minutes before the processional, looking resplendent in a champagne-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She moved through the room like a queen greeting her subjects, accepting congratulations and compliments with gracious authority. When she reached my row, she paused and offered me a smile that managed to be both warm and condescending. "Margaret, how lovely that you could be here today. Jessica looks absolutely radiant." "I'm sure she does," I replied, though I hadn't seen Jessica yet. She's been so grateful for all the support she's received during the planning process. It really does take a village to create a wedding like this, a village in which I was apparently not a resident. The processional began with Christopher's entrance, accompanied by his groomsmen. He looked handsome and confident in his tailored tuxedo, every inch the successful young businessman ready to claim his bride. His smile as he took his place at the altar was genuine and warm. Whatever else I might think about this situation, it was clear that he truly loved Jessica. The bridesmaids followed, 6 women in flowing lavender dresses who moved down the aisle with practiced grace. I recognized 2 of them from Jessica's college years, but the others were strangers to me. New friends from her post-graduation life, people who belonged to the world she was entering rather than the one she was leaving behind. Then came the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. The wedding march began, and every guest rose to their feet as the bride appeared at the back of the aisle. Jessica looked breathtaking. Her dress was a masterpiece of silk and lace, clearly custom-made and probably worth more than I'd spent on clothing in the past 5 years combined. Her hair was swept into an elaborate updo adorned with fresh flowers, and her makeup was flawless. She looked like a princess from a fairy tale, transformed into someone almost unrecognizable from the little girl who used to practice walking in my high heels. But it wasn't Jessica's beauty that took my breath away. It was seeing Patricia Blackwell, step forward to take her arm. I had known this moment was coming. Jessica had told me weeks ago that Patricia would be escorting her down the aisle. But knowing it intellectually was different from witnessing it emotionally. Watching another woman, a woman who had known Jessica for less than 3 years, assume the role that should have been mine felt like a physical blow. Patricia looked radiant in her borrowed maternal authority, smiling proudly as she guided Jessica down the aisle. They moved together with practiced coordination, as if they'd rehearsed this moment. Patricia's expression conveyed exactly the right mixture of joy, pride, and maternal love that the occasion demanded. And Jessica? Jessica looked happy, not just beautiful, but genuinely, radiantly happy as she walked toward her future on the arm of the woman she'd chosen to replace me. I remained standing with the other guests, my hands clasped tightly in front of me to keep them from shaking. I watched my daughter pass my row without so much as a glance in my direction, her attention focused entirely on Christopher waiting at the altar and Patricia guiding her steps. When they reached the front of the ceremony space, the officiant asked, "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" Patricia stepped forward with a smile that could have powered the hotel's lighting system. "Her family does, with love and blessing. Her family. Not I do or we do, but her family," as if Patricia were speaking on behalf of all of Jessica's relatives, including me. As if she had the authority to give away a daughter she'd never raised, never sacrificed for, never loved through the difficult years when love was hard work rather than social pleasure. I sank back into my seat as the ceremony continued, feeling invisible and irrelevant. The vows were beautiful, the music was perfect, the setting was elegant. Everything was exactly as Jessica had dreamed it would be. Everything except the presence of her actual mother in any meaningful role. During the Unity Candle ceremony, Patricia was invited to stand beside the couple, representing Jessica's family while Christopher's father represented his. I watched from my distant seat as the woman who had known my daughter for a fraction of her life participated in one of the wedding's most symbolic moments. The ceremony concluded with the traditional kiss and recessional. As the newlyweds walked back down the aisle, Jessica's eyes swept across the guests, acknowledging smiles and waves from friends and family. When her gaze passed over my section, I raised my hand slightly and smiled, hoping for some sign of recognition, some acknowledgement that I was there. But Jessica's eyes moved past me without pause, as if I were just another face in the crowd rather than the woman who had given her life meaning and purpose for 25 years. After the ceremony, guests moved to the cocktail hour while the wedding party took formal photos. I lingered in the lobby, watching through the windows as Rebecca Martinez directed the photography session. Patricia stood prominently in every family grouping, her arm around Jessica's shoulders, her smile bright and maternal. I wasn't invited to be part of the formal photography session, of course. According to Jessica's plan, I would appear only in casual reception photos, background decoration rather than featured family. But as I watched Rebecca work, I noticed something that gave me a small measure of satisfaction. She was taking more photos than necessary, capturing multiple angles, extended sequences, candid moments between poses. I realized she was documenting everything, not just the perfect moments Jessica had requested, but the full story of who was present, who was excluded, and who was really responsible for making this day possible. What Jessica didn't know, what none of the Blackwell family suspected, was that the photographer capturing their perfect family celebration had been hired by the woman they'd relegated to the back row. Every beautiful image they would treasure for years to come existed because I had made it possible. Soon, that truth would emerge in ways none of us could have anticipated. The crystal ballroom had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. Hundreds of white roses and peonies cascaded from crystal chandeliers, while soft candlelight flickered from every table. The room buzzed with the satisfied energy of guests who knew they were attending a truly spectacular event. I found my assigned table, number 12, positioned strategically in the back corner where I'd have an excellent view of the festivities while remaining largely invisible to the main action. My tablemates were a collection of Jessica's distant relatives and Christopher's business acquaintances' spouses, people who smiled politely but had little interest in conversation with someone they perceived as peripheral to the celebration. The head table commanded attention at the front of the room, where Jessica and Christopher sat surrounded by their wedding party. Patricia had been given a place of honor at the family table directly adjacent to the newlyweds, while I watched from my distant vantage point like a theater patron in the cheap seats. During the cocktail hour, I'd made several attempts to approach Jessica and offer my congratulations, but each time I'd been intercepted by well-meaning guests or wedding coordinators directing traffic flow. It became clear that my access to the bride was being carefully managed, whether intentionally or simply as a result of my assigned position in the wedding hierarchy. The dinner service was impeccable. Multiple courses of food that probably cost more per plate than I typically spent on groceries in a week. I made polite conversation with my table mates about the beautiful flowers and elegant venue, carefully avoiding any mention of my relationship to the bride. It was easier to let people assume I was a family friend rather than explain why the mother of the bride was seated so far from the action. The speeches began after the main course, and each one drove home my outsider status more clearly than the last. Christopher's father spoke eloquently about welcoming Jessica into their family, praising her intelligence, grace, and perfect compatibility with their son. Patricia followed with a touching tribute to the daughter of her heart, describing how blessed she felt to have gained such a wonderful addition to their family. "Jessica has brought such joy into our lives," Patricia said, her voice warm with emotion. "From the moment Christopher brought her home, I knew she was special. She has the kind of character and values that make a mother proud, and I couldn't be happier to officially call her my daughter." The applause was thunderous. Guests dabbed at their eyes with napkins, moved by Patricia's maternal pride and obvious affection for Jessica. I joined the applause, but my hands felt mechanical, disconnected from any genuine emotion. When the speeches concluded without any acknowledgement of my presence or role in Jessica's life, I excused myself from the table and stepped onto the hotel's terrace for some air. The rain had stopped, and Seattle's skyline glittered across the water, beautiful and distant. I was standing there, trying to process the surreal experience of being a stranger at my own daughter's wedding, when Rebecca Martinez appeared beside me. "Mrs. Chen, are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said automatically, then looked at her more carefully. "Actually, no, I'm not fine. But I'm sure you've noticed that already." Rebecca nodded sympathetically. "I've been documenting weddings for 8 years, and I've never seen a family dynamic quite like this one." "What do you mean?" "Well, for starters, it took me 3 hours to figure out who you were. No one introduced you as the mother of the bride. You weren't included in any of the family photos. You're seated at the back of the reception. If I hadn't done my research beforehand, I would have assumed you were a distant relative or family friend." "That's essentially what I am now," I said, quietly. "But here's what's interesting," Rebecca continued. "I've been taking candid shots throughout the evening, and Jessica keeps looking for you. During the ceremony, during photos, during dinner, her eyes keep scanning the room until she locates you. It's like she needs to know you're here, even though she's not acknowledging your presence. This surprised me. She's been looking for me? Constantly. And there's something else. During the formal photo session, Patricia kept trying to position herself in shots that would traditionally include the mother of the bride. But Jessica seemed uncomfortable with some of those poses. She kept adjusting her position, creating space, as if she was expecting someone else to join the group. Did she say anything? At one point, she asked me if I thought we had enough family photos. When I told her we could take more if she wanted to include anyone else, She looked toward the hotel entrance like she was hoping someone might appear. Patricia redirected the conversation, but the moment stuck with me. I felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. Do you think she regrets her decisions? I think she's a young woman trying to navigate competing loyalties, and she's discovering that some choices have consequences she didn't anticipate. Before I could respond, we were interrupted by Patricia Blackwell herself, appearing on the terrace with a concerned expression. "Margaret, there you are," Jessica was asking. "About you? She wants to make sure you're enjoying yourself." The irony of Patricia serving as a messenger between Jessica and me wasn't lost on either Rebecca or myself. Even when my daughter wanted to check on my well-being, she couldn't approach me directly. "Please tell her I'm having a lovely time," I said evenly. "Actually, she was hoping to get a few photos with you. Nothing formal, just some casual shots during the dancing portion of the evening." Casual shots. Even now, my presence in my daughter's wedding album would be relegated to afterthoughts rather than intentional documentation. Of course, I'd be honored. Patricia smiled and returned to the reception, leaving Rebecca and me alone on the terrace. Again. "Mrs. Chen, can I ask you something?" Rebecca said carefully. "Of course. How did Jessica and Christopher find me? My services are typically booked months in advance, and I rarely offer the kind of discount they mentioned receiving." This was the moment I'd been both anticipating and dreading. Rebecca was an intelligent professional, and she'd clearly been thinking about the unusual circumstances of her hiring. What kind of discount did they mention? They said I'd offered them a special promotional rate for young couples. Essentially, 60% off my normal fee. But I've never offered that kind of promotion, and my booking calendar shows full payment for their date. I took a deep breath, realizing that the truth was about to emerge whether I was ready or not. "Rebecca, there's something you should know about your payment for this wedding." She looked at me expectantly. "Jessica and Christopher didn't hire you at a discount rate. I hired you at your full rate, plus the coordination fee we discussed. They think they're paying you a reduced amount, but I've been covering the difference all along." Rebecca's eyes widened as the implications sank in. "You mean, you've been paying for their wedding photography this entire time?" "Yes. I wanted Jessica to have the best possible documentation of her wedding day, even if I couldn't be part of planning it. It was my gift to her, though she doesn't know it." "Mrs. Chen, do you realize what this means? Every photo they'll treasure from today, every memory they'll hang on their walls, it exists because of you." "I realize that, but they don't, and I'm not sure they ever will." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, she spoke again. "Mrs. Chen, I need to tell you something. When I deliver their final photo collection, next week, it's going to include a detailed invoice showing all services provided and payments received. That's standard practice for my business." "I understand." "That invoice is going to show that their photography package was paid in full by Margaret Chen, not by them. They're going to discover that the woman they relegated to the back row, the woman they excluded from family photos, the woman they treated like a distant relative, she's the one who made their perfect wedding documentation possible." The weight of this revelation settled over both of us. In trying to minimize my role in Jessica's wedding day, she had inadvertently set up a situation where my contribution would be impossible to ignore or deny. "What do you think will happen when they see that invoice?" I asked. "I think," Rebecca said carefully, "they're going to realize that love sometimes looks different than they expected. And I think your daughter is going to have to confront some uncomfortable truths about who really supported her during the most important day of her life." We returned to the reception just as the dancing began. Jessica had changed into a simpler dress for the evening celebration, and she looked radiant as she and Christopher took the floor for their first dance. The song was "At Last" by Etta James, and they moved together with the easy grace of two people genuinely in love. For a moment, watching them dance, I forgot about the hurt and exclusion. This was my daughter, and she was happy. That had always been my primary goal as her mother: her happiness, her success, her ability to build a life filled with love and possibility. But as the evening progressed and I remained a spectator rather than a participant in the celebration, I began to understand that my gift to Jessica wasn't just the photography. It was also the lesson she was about to learn about the true cost of choosing social advancement over family loyalty. In 1 week, when Rebecca delivered those photos along with the invoice that would reveal my secret, Jessica would discover that the mother she'd tried to erase from her special day had actually made it possible. Every beautiful image, every captured moment of joy, every memory she would treasure, all of it paid for by the woman she'd relegated to the back corner of her own wedding. The revelation was coming, and it would change everything. 1 week after the wedding, I was in my home office editing photos from a client's anniversary party when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Jessica's name, and for a moment, I felt that familiar flutter of hope that maybe she was calling to thank me for attending her wedding, or perhaps to share some of the joy from her honeymoon in Tuscany. Instead, when I answered, I was greeted by a voice I'd never heard from my daughter before: raw, shaking, and barely controlled. "Mom, I need to see you right now." "Jessica, what's wrong? Are you all right?" "No, I'm not all right. I'm on my way to your house. We need to talk." "Honey, what happened? Is Christopher okay?" "Just be there. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in confusion and growing alarm. Jessica sounded devastated, but I couldn't imagine what could have gone wrong so quickly after what had appeared to be a perfect wedding and honeymoon. I spent the next 20 minutes pacing my living room, my mind cycling through possibilities. Had something happened to Christopher? Had their honeymoon been a disaster? Had Patricia Blackwell said something that finally opened Jessica's eyes to how she'd treated me? When Jessica's BMW pulled into my driveway, I was at the front door before she'd even turned off the engine. She sat in the car for a full minute, her hands gripping the steering wheel, her head down. When she finally emerged, I barely recognized her. Gone was the polished, confident woman who had glided down the aisle a week earlier. This Jessica looked hollow-eyed and fragile, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her face bare of makeup. She wore jeans and an old sweatshirt I remembered from her college years, comfort clothes that suggested she'd dressed without thinking, grabbing whatever was closest. "Jessica, sweetheart, what's wrong?" She walked past me into the house without answering, moving directly to the living room where she collapsed onto the sofa, the same sofa where she'd done homework throughout high school, where we'd watched movies on countless Friday nights, where I'd held her while she cried over her first heartbreak. She sat there for a long moment, staring at her hands, before finally reaching into her purse and pulling out a manila envelope. "Mom, I need you to explain this to me." She handed me the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a professional invoice from Rebecca Martinez. Photography, detailed and official, listing every service provided for Jessica's wedding. At the bottom, in clear black ink, was the payment information. Total amount due, $8,500. Paid in full by Margaret Chen. Balance owing, 0.00. I looked at the invoice, then at Jessica's devastated face, and realized that the moment of truth had finally arrived. "Jessica, no," she interrupted, her voice sharp. "Don't explain yet. Let me tell you what happened first." She took a shaky breath and continued. "Christopher and I got back from our honeymoon yesterday. This morning, Rebecca delivered our wedding photos. They're beautiful, by the way, absolutely perfect. Everything we dreamed they would be. I waited, knowing what was coming next. Along with the photos, she gave us this invoice. For her records, she said. A final summary of services provided and payment received. Christopher looked at it first, and he went completely white. He asked me if I'd seen it, if I knew what it said, and I thought, What's the big deal? It's just an invoice. Jessica's voice began to crack. But then I read it. And I saw your name. Your name, Mom, as the person who paid for our entire wedding photography package. Not some promotional discount. Not some special rate for young couples. You. You paid for everything. Tears were streaming down her face now, and I felt my own eyes beginning to fill. Christopher asked me if I knew. He asked me if we'd somehow forgotten to pay Rebecca, if there had been some mix-up, and I had to tell him the truth, that I had no idea, that as far as I knew, we'd hired Rebecca at a discounted rate and paid her ourselves. Jessica, I'm not finished, she said, her voice rising. Do you know what Christopher said then? He said, your mother paid for our wedding photographer, and you didn't even include her in the family photos. He said it like I was some kind of monster. And you know what? He's right. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing with the kind of abandon I hadn't seen since she was a child. Mom, I called Rebecca to ask for an explanation. I thought maybe there was some mistake, some confusion about the billing, but she told me everything. She told me that you contacted her months ago, that you wanted to give us the gift of professional photography, even though we weren't speaking. She told me that you paid her full rate plus extra fees to coordinate the arrangement so we'd never know. I set the invoice aside and moved to sit beside Jessica on the sofa, but she held up a hand to stop me. She also told me something else. She told me that you asked her to take candid photos of you throughout the wedding, because you knew you wouldn't be in any of the formal family portraits. You knew I was going to exclude you, and you still made sure we'd have perfect documentation of the day. Jessica looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. Mom, how could you do that? How could you give us such an incredible gift while I was treating you like you didn't matter? Because you're my daughter, I said simply. Because I wanted your wedding day to be perfect, even if I couldn't be part of making it perfect. But I was so horrible to you. I excluded you from everything. I let Patricia take your place in every tradition, every photo, every meaningful moment. I treated you like an embarrassment, like someone I needed to hide from Christopher's family. No, and you still? You still spent thousands of dollars to make sure our wedding photos would be beautiful? Yes. Jessica broke down completely then, sobbing with the kind of grief that comes from recognizing irreversible damage. I moved closer, and tentatively put my arm around her shoulders. She didn't pull away, but collapsed against me instead, crying like the little girl she used to be. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened to me. I don't know why I thought Patricia could replace you, why I thought I needed to choose between my old life and my new one. I held her while she cried, stroking her hair, the way I had when she was small and the world seemed too big and scary to handle. I know why, I said gently. You were trying to fit into a world that felt foreign to you. You were trying to become someone you thought Christopher and his family would accept completely. You were scared that if they really knew where you came from, they might decide you weren't good enough. But that's exactly what happened anyway, Jessica said through her tears. Christopher is furious with me. Not because of where I come from or how much money we have, but because of how I treated you. He said he's ashamed to be married to someone who could be so cruel to the person who raised her. This surprised me. Christopher said that? He said that if I could discard you so easily, how could he trust that I wouldn't do the same to him if someone better came along? He said the way someone treats their family tells you everything you need to know about their character. I felt a grudging respect for Christopher that I hadn't expected. Despite his privileged background, he seemed to understand something about loyalty and gratitude that Jessica had forgotten. What did you tell him? I told him he was right. I told him that I'd made the worst mistake of my life and that I didn't know if I could fix it. She looked up at me with desperate eyes. Mom, can I fix it? Is it too late? Jessica, the fact that you're here, the fact that you're asking that question, that's a start. But how do I make up for what I did? How do I apologize for something so awful? You don't make up for it, I said carefully. You learn from it. You make sure you never do anything like it again. And you accept that some things can't be undone, only forgiven. Do you forgive me? I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, for the first time in months. I saw the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I saw the teenager who cried in my arms after her first heartbreak. I saw the young woman who had called me first when she got her dream job. But I also saw someone who had hurt me more deeply than I'd thought possible, someone who had been willing to erase me from the most important day of her life for the sake of social acceptance. I forgive you, I said finally. But Jessica, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean we can go back to the way things were before. I know. I want the chance to try to be better, to be the daughter you deserve to have. You were always the daughter I deserved to have, I said. Even when you were making terrible choices, you were still my daughter. But now you need to decide who you want to be going forward. Jessica nodded, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. Christopher wants to take you to dinner. He wants to apologize for what happened at the wedding, for how his family participated in excluding you. That's not necessary. It is to him, and it is to me. Mom, I want to try to make this right. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to try to build something better. I hugged her tighter, feeling cautiously hopeful for the first time in months. The invoice that had revealed my secret had also revealed the truth about what really mattered. Not social status or perfect appearances, but the love between people who choose to show up for each other, even when it's hard. The road back wouldn't be easy, but at least we were finally walking it together. 3 days after Jessica's tearful visit, I received a call from Christopher. His voice was formal but warm, carrying none of the distant politeness I'd expected from someone who barely knew me. Mrs. Chen, this is Christopher Hayes. I'm hoping you might have time to join Jessica and me for dinner this weekend. There are some things I'd like to discuss with you. Christopher, that's very kind, but it's not necessary. Jessica and I are working through things. Actually, it is necessary, for me at least. I need to apologize to you in person for what happened at our wedding, and I need to understand some things about my wife's family history that I clearly didn't know before. His use of the phrase, my wife's family history, rather than Jessica's background, suggested a level of respect that surprised me. This wasn't a man trying to distance himself from his wife's origins, but someone genuinely trying to understand them. All right, where would you like to meet? Would you be comfortable coming to our apartment? Jessica's been cooking all week, trying to remember recipes you taught her. I think she needs to show you she remembers more than just the painful parts of her childhood. Saturday evening found me standing outside Jessica and Christopher's downtown apartment, holding a bottle of wine and fighting nerves I hadn't felt since my first date after my divorce. This wasn't just dinner with my daughter and son-in-law. This was a reckoning with months of hurt and the possibility of rebuilding something that had been broken. Jessica answered the door wearing an apron I recognized from my own kitchen. One I'd given her when she moved out, printed with world's best sous chef that we'd laughed about because she could barely boil water at the time. Mom, thank you for coming. She hugged me tightly, holding on longer than usual. I've been cooking since this morning. I made your chicken and dumplings recipe, the one you always made when I was sick. The apartment smelled like home, like simmering broth and fresh herbs, like comfort food prepared with care rather than convenience. Jessica led me to their dining room, where Christopher stood waiting beside a table set with what appeared to be their wedding china. Mrs. Chen, thank you for coming, he said, stepping forward to shake my hand. I know this situation is complicated, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to meet you properly. Up close, without the formal atmosphere of wedding festivities, Christopher seemed younger and more approachable than I'd expected. He had kind eyes and an easy smile, and when he looked at Jessica, I could see genuine affection and concern rather than the calculated social partnership I'd feared their marriage might be. Please, call me Margaret, and thank you for inviting me. As we sat down to dinner, I was struck by how nervous both Jessica and Christopher seemed. This wasn't the confident couple I'd watched at their wedding reception, but two young people, trying to navigate a complicated situation with grace and honesty. Margaret, Christopher began, I want to start by apologizing. I had no idea that you'd been excluded from so many aspects of our wedding planning. If I had known, I would have insisted things be handled differently. Christopher, you don't need to apologize for something you didn't know about. But I should have known. I should have asked more questions about why you weren't involved, why I wasn't meeting you, why Jessica seemed uncomfortable whenever your name came up. Jessica looked down at her plate, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Jessica told me about the conversation you had after the engagement party, Christopher continued, about how she asked you to step back so that my mother could handle the traditional mother of the bride responsibilities. She was trying to fit into your family's world, I said diplomatically. No, she was trying to erase where she came from because she thought I'd be ashamed of it, Christopher said bluntly. And that tells me I failed as her partner because somewhere along the way, I made her feel like she needed to be someone different to be worthy of my love. Jessica looked up at him with tears in her eyes. Christopher, that's not your fault. It's partially my fault, he interrupted gently. I should have made it clearer that I fell in love with Jessica Chen from Tacoma, daughter of Margaret Chen, not some polished version of herself that she thought my family would prefer. I felt a surge of respect for this young man who was taking responsibility for dynamics he hadn't fully understood. Margaret, I need you to know something, Christopher continued. My parents may have expensive taste and social pretensions, but they're not cruel people. If they had known how deeply Jessica was hurting you in order to impress them, they would have been horrified. This surprised me. Really? My mother called me yesterday after Jessica told her about the photography situation. She wanted me to tell you how mortified she is. She said that accepting the mother of the bride role was the worst mistake she's ever made, because she was so focused on helping Jessica that she never considered she might be replacing you. I don't think Patricia meant any harm, I said, and I mostly meant it. Maybe not, but the harm was done anyway. And Jessica and I both need to take responsibility for allowing it to happen. Jessica finally spoke up, her voice small and uncertain. Mom, I've been thinking about what you said the other day, about forgiveness not meaning we can go back to the way things were. I understand that now, but I want to ask you something. What is it, sweetheart? I want to know if you'd be willing to let me try to earn your trust back, not as your little girl who made a mistake, but as an adult who needs to prove she's learned something important about what really matters. What did you have in mind? Jessica and Christopher exchanged a look, and he nodded encouragingly. I want to do something about the wedding photos, Jessica said. Rebecca gave us the most beautiful collection, and you're barely in any of them because of the restrictions I placed on her. I want to do a new photo session, a real family session, with you in every shot you should have been in the first time. Jessica, that's not necessary. It is necessary, for me. I want photos that tell the true story of our family, not the fiction I created for the wedding. I want pictures that show Christopher meeting the woman who raised me, the woman who made me possible. Christopher leaned forward. Margaret, I've been looking at Jessica's childhood photos, the ones she has displayed around the apartment. Every major milestone, every important moment. You're there. You're the constant presence in her life. But when people look at our wedding album, they'll see my mother in all those significant moments instead of you. That's not right, Jessica added. Someday, when we have children, they're going to look at those photos and wonder who their grandmother is. I don't want them to be confused about who really raised their mother. I felt tears beginning to form. You want to have children? Eventually, yes. And when we do, I want them to know their real grandmother. I want them to hear stories about the woman who worked 2 jobs to give their mother opportunities, who taught her about resilience and sacrifice and unconditional love. I want that too, Christopher said. I want our children to understand that the strength and character that made me fall in love with Jessica came from somewhere. It came from you. The 3 of us sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of shared understanding settling over the table. There's something else, Jessica said hesitantly. Christopher and I have been talking about our future, about the kind of life we want to build together. And we've realized that we don't want to live in the same social bubble as his parents. We want something more authentic, more connected to real values. What does that mean practically? It means I'm leaving my job at the advertising firm, Jessica said. I want to start my own business, something that reflects my actual interests rather than what looks impressive on paper. And it means we're looking for a different house, something in a neighborhood where we'll have real neighbors, not just other wealthy families. It means, Christopher added, that we want to build our marriage on a foundation of genuine relationships rather than social connections. And the most important relationship Jessica has, other than ours, is with you. I looked at my daughter, seeing echoes of the little girl who used to help me in my photography studio, who would carefully organize equipment and ask thoughtful questions about composition and lighting. What kind of business are you thinking about starting? Jessica smiled, the first genuine, relaxed smile I'd seen from her in months. Actually, I was hoping you might consider partnering with me. I want to get back into photography, but focus on family portraits and life celebrations. Real moments, authentic emotions. The kind of work you taught me to value. You want to work together? I want to learn from you again. I want to remember what you taught me about capturing the truth of people's lives, not just their perfect moments. Christopher raised his wine glass. To second chances, he said, and to the photographer who made sure our wedding day was perfectly documented, even when she wasn't being perfectly honored. As we clinked glasses, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, hope for the future. Not just hope that Jessica and I could rebuild our relationship, but hope that she was finally ready to become the person I'd always believed she could be. The invoice that had revealed my secret gift had become the catalyst for something much more valuable, the beginning of honesty, accountability, and real family bonds built on respect rather than obligation. We still had work to do, trust to rebuild, and new patterns to establish. But for the first time since receiving that formal wedding invitation, I believed we were going to be okay. 6 months after that life-changing dinner at Jessica and Christopher's apartment, I found myself in a place I never could have imagined. Rebecca Martinez and I were setting up equipment in my newly expanded home studio, preparing for what had become a monthly family portrait session with clients who specifically sought out our collaborative approach to capturing authentic family moments. The partnership Jessica had proposed that evening had evolved into something none of us had expected. Rather than simply working together, we'd created something entirely new, a photography business that specialized in documenting real families with complex stories, blended backgrounds, and imperfect but genuine love. Chen and Martinez family. Photography had grown beyond our wildest dreams, fueled by word of mouth from clients who appreciated our commitment to capturing truth rather than perfection. We'd photographed military families dealing with deployment separations, multi-generational households navigating cultural differences, and adopted children meeting biological relatives for the first time. Our specialty had become what we called healing sessions, photo shoots designed to document relationships that were being rebuilt, families that were coming back together after periods of separation or conflict. We'd discovered that the camera could be a powerful tool for reconciliation, forcing people to see each other clearly and creating visual evidence of love that had survived difficult times. Jessica had proven to be a natural at this work, bringing both technical skill and emotional intelligence to every session. She had an uncanny ability to help clients relax into authenticity, to capture moments that revealed the genuine connections beneath surface tensions. "The Andersons are here," Rebecca called from the front window, where she was watching for our afternoon clients, a family reuniting after the parents' bitter divorce had finally ended in successful co-parenting. As we prepared for the session, I reflected on how dramatically our own family story had changed. The formal wedding photos that had once caused Jessica so much regret now sat alongside dozens of new images that told our real story. We'd done 3 major photo sessions over the past 6 months, each one marking a different stage in our healing process. The first session, just 2 weeks after that dinner conversation, had been awkward and emotional. Jessica had insisted on recreating some of the traditional mother-daughter poses she'd excluded me from at the wedding. But as Rebecca directed us through the shots, something unexpected had happened. We'd started laughing, real, genuine laughter, as we struggled with formal poses that felt foreign to our actual relationship. "This is ridiculous," Jessica had said, dissolving into giggles as Rebecca tried to position us in a classic mother of the bride tableau. "We never pose like this. We're not formal people." "Then let's shoot you as the people you actually are," Rebecca had suggested, and the session had transformed into something magical. Instead of recreating wedding poses, we'd captured ourselves cooking together in my kitchen, looking through old photo albums, working side by side in my garden. Those photos now hung in both our homes, honest images that showed a mother and daughter who were learning to love each other as adults, rather than trying to recreate a childhood relationship that no longer fit. The second major session had included Christopher, documenting his integration into our family in a way that felt natural rather than forced. Unlike the wedding photos where he'd appeared as Jessica's pathway to a different life, these images showed him as someone who appreciated and respected where she came from. My favorite photo from that session captured a moment when Christopher was looking through my old cameras, asking technical questions about film photography while Jessica and I prepared dinner in the background. His genuine curiosity about my work, his respect for the craft that had supported Jessica's childhood, spoke volumes about the man my daughter had married. The third session had been the most meaningful. We'd invited Linda, my sister, along with Jessica's great-aunt from Portland and a few family friends who had been part of our lives for years. It was the family celebration that the wedding should have been. Intimate, authentic, focused on relationships that had been tested by time and circumstances. But perhaps the most significant change hadn't been captured in any photograph. It was the gradual rebuilding of daily connection between Jessica and me. She'd started calling regularly again, not with specific agendas or formal updates, but with the casual intimacy of someone sharing their life with a person who cared. She'd tell me about challenges at work, funny conversations with Christopher, her thoughts about eventually starting a family. I'd share stories about my clients, updates about my garden, memories of her childhood that seemed relevant to whatever she was experiencing. We'd also begun a new tradition, Sunday dinners at my house, where Jessica would help me cook while Christopher worked on home improvement projects I'd been putting off for years. These weren't formal occasions or obligatory family gatherings, but comfortable time spent together because we enjoyed each other's company. The transformation in Christopher had been equally remarkable. Far from the privileged young man I'd initially perceived him to be, he'd revealed himself to be thoughtful, hard-working, and genuinely committed to understanding the experiences that had shaped his wife. He'd started volunteering with a nonprofit that provided business mentoring to working-class families, using his financial background to help people start small businesses or improve their economic situations. He'd also convinced Jessica to join him in volunteering, and watching them work together on projects that mattered had shown me a side of their relationship I'd never seen before. "The session went beautifully," Rebecca said as we finished cleaning up after the Anderson family had left. "Did you see the moment when their teenage daughter finally smiled? She's been sullen through 3 previous attempts at family photos, but today she relaxed. She needed to see that her parents could be in the same room without fighting, I said. Sometimes the camera forces people to practice being the family they want to be. Speaking of which, how are things going with the Hayes family portraits? For next week? Next week marked a full year since Jessica's wedding, and she'd requested an anniversary session. Not just of her and Christopher, but of our entire extended family, including the Blackwell parents. It would be the first time Patricia and Richard had been photographed with me since the engagement party, and I was curious to see how those dynamics had evolved. Patricia had reached out to me personally several months earlier, requesting a private conversation that had surprised me with its honesty and vulnerability. She'd apologized for overstepping boundaries during the wedding planning, explaining that she'd been so focused on helping Jessica navigate their social circle that she'd never considered the impact on me. I was raised to believe that helping someone succeed meant introducing them to the right people and teaching them the right protocols, she'd said. I never thought about what that meant for the people who had already given them everything they needed to succeed. We'd developed an unexpectedly warm relationship, built on mutual respect rather than competition. Patricia had even referred several clients to our photography business, wealthy families who wanted genuine documentation rather than formal portraits designed to project status. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Jessica, calling from the small office space she and Christopher had rented for their new consulting business. "Mom, I have news," she said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Good news, I hope?" "The best news. Christopher and I just signed a contract to provide business consulting services to 3 small photography studios in the region. We're going to help them expand their operations, improve their marketing, and develop sustainable business models." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. But here's the really exciting part. One of the studios specifically requested that we bring you in as a creative consultant. They want to learn about the kind of authentic family photography we've been developing." I felt a surge of pride and possibility. "You want me to teach other photographers? We want you to share what you've learned about capturing real relationships, about creating space for healing in family photography. You've developed something unique, Mom, and other people want to learn from it." As we talked about the details of this new opportunity, I realized how completely our relationship had transformed. We were no longer just mother and daughter trying to repair past hurts. We were creative partners, business collaborators, and friends who genuinely enjoyed working together. The evening light was beginning to fade as I locked up my studio and prepared to head home. In a few hours, Jessica and Christopher would arrive for our weekly Sunday dinner, bringing groceries and stories from their week. We'd cook together, share updates about our work and our lives, and enjoy the comfortable intimacy of family time that required no performance or pretense. Tomorrow, I'd start planning the anniversary photo session that would document how far we'd all come. Instead of recreating wedding poses that had excluded me, we'd capture the family we'd actually become, complicated, imperfect, but genuine in our commitment to loving each other through difficulties. The invoice that had once revealed my secret gift had become the foundation for something much more valuable, a relationship built on honesty, respect, and the understanding that real love shows up even when it's not convenient, even when it's not appreciated, even when it requires sacrifice without recognition. Jessica had learned that family isn't about choosing the people who make you look good, but about honoring the people who made you who you are. And I had learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the space to make their own mistakes and find their own way back to what matters. As I drove home, through the familiar streets of Tacoma, I smiled at the thought of next week's photo session. For the first time in over a year, I would be exactly where I belonged, in the center of my daughter's life, not as an obligation to be managed, but as a beloved family member whose presence made every important moment more meaningful. The camera. would capture what we'd always known but sometimes forgotten: that love, real love, finds a way to survive even when everything else falls apart. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it comes back stronger than before. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.